There is nothing out there released in the modern era that can do what Grand Prix 4 could do. Like, nothing. And this is a game that's going to be 20 years old next year. The Jeff Crammond Grand Prix series is... it's the Ford Transit, it's the iPhone, it's the TV show The Wire, it's the daddy of them all. But Jeff Crammond didn't really have much of an interest in motor racing when he devised the first of his motor racing games called Revs, which was a Formula 3 simulator released for the BBC Micro in 1984. And prior to that, he'd come up with a couple of flight simulators because he wanted to put his physics degree to good use. It's said that he looked at doing motor racing games or simulations because nobody was really doing it, because golf and flight sims were, although basic, they were relatively easy to do by comparison because there's no tyre model to think of, there's no simulation of downforce, there's no this, there's no that. So in 1991, Jeff Crammond's Grand Prix was released, mirroring the 1991 Formula 1 season. The tracks were real, but the drivers were not, but the drivers' helmets were accurate to the driver. Such names included Carlos Sanchez as Ayrton Senna and Mario Innocenti as Riccardo Patrese. I know, it's ridiculous. But all of the real driver names were included in the manual, which you had to have on hand to get into the game in the first place, because the game prompted you when you started it up, in DOS no less, to find a specific word on a specific page and a specific line of the manual as part of the copy protection, because DRM in the form of CD keys and Steam profile integrations didn't exist. This is pre-internet as well. It even included a blatant rip of the Fleetwood Mac song The Chain as the intro music, which added to the immersion of playing through a Formula 1 season. It was something along the lines of doom, doo-doo-doom, doo-doo-doo-doo-doom. Of course, we all know how the original goes. I was going to play it on an actual guitar, but you know how algorithms are. As well as this, all the basic ways of setting up a car were included, and it actually made a difference when you were driving. And you had rear view mirrors, an instant replay system, and the timed your lap to 1,000th of a second. And while the circuits aren't on the same laser scan level as you'll find in iRacing or ACC or rFactor 2 today, you had a decent idea of where you were on track, so Maggotts and Beckett's, Eau Rouge, the 130R and so on. It even had wet weather driving. That was a big deal back then. This was followed by a sequel in 1996, Grand Prix 2, and that mirrored the 1994 season with a few subtle changes. So Coulthard replaced Senna for the whole season, Herbert was at Lotus for the whole season, while Verstappen spent the whole season at Benetton, and there were some of the 1994 track changes, but the ones at Eau Rouge and at Barcelona and at Canada didn't exist. It was also fully licensed, so not only were all the real drivers and tracks used, but the cars came with fully loaded sponsor liveries as well. Except the tobacco logos, obviously. But the Kronenberg logo was still used at Imola for some reason, and it wasn't even the Tourtel alcohol-free version. Unless I'm misremembering things, obviously. Microprose also made vast improvements to the damage system, so in the previous game where you could damage your front and rear wing, it was just cosmetic damage because of limitations in the game engine, but it still affected your performance. In Grand Prix 2, you could knock off any of the four wheels and the rear and front wings could fly off the car. And it introduced mechanical failures, so your car could break down in the middle of a race for a number of ways, including but not limited to throttle problems, punctures, engines blowing out, oil leaks and gearbox faults. If you T-boned a car hard enough at La Source, you can actually break the car in half. This was then updated again in 2000, Grand Prix 3, which migrated the whole thing over to Windows and had 3D graphics, the works. Wet weather, which was taken out for Grand Prix 2, returned, and all of the drivers and teams were once again licensed, including the greatest ever driver to grace the virtual motorsport world, John Newhouse. They even made the wet weather totally dynamic, so it could start raining in the middle of a Grand Prix, and a dry line even appeared when the rain stopped and the cars continued driving around. So basically, stuff that should be a standard in modern racing games. But despite getting very favourable reviews and expansion pack to update the game to the 2000 season that included Indianapolis and Sepang, sales were disappointing compared to the two games that came before. It sold very well in the UK, Italy and German-speaking countries, but in Spain it only sold 6,500 copies, mostly due to the severe problem with software piracy that the Spanish had at that time. In addition, EA was producing the official Formula 1 games for the PC and the PlayStation, so people could either buy a game that mirrored a season from a couple of years ago, or they could play the game that had the current season. The only thing that Grand Prix 3 had going in its favour is that it was a much better game all round than the disappointing F1 1998 by Psygnosis. Then in 2002, Grand Prix 4 arrived, the last in the series to date, and I say that because Microprose is making a comeback. The graphics were updated once more. It included the actual TV graphics of the time from the F1 digital platform, and some of the features that were included in the 2000 expansion pack for Grand Prix 3 made their way across, such as improvements to the sound engine. Wet Weather Driver from Grand Prix 3 was also back with the dynamic weather system updated and wet weather physics improved, and it also contained the 2001 season, albeit a year behind what EA was doing. So it included a very young looking Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso and Kimi Räikkönen. In fact, there is Verstappen, Schumacher, Räikkönen and Alonso on the grid. Mental when you think about it, considering this year that's also happening. But it was a bit harder to mod compared to the previous titles, but once the modding process was cracked, the modders went crazy, and it still receives updates even now. There is a mod for virtually every season in Formula 1 history available. There is certainly a mod from 1988 up until the present day, so you could, in theory, recreate your favourite driver's career. But larger grids, such as the one in 1989, can't be done because the game only supports 22 cars at one time, and unlike the 1991 game, doesn't have the pre-qualifying system for the minnows. This can cause problems for the 1994 mod, so you basically have a drop-down menu in Car Set Manager that basically says, you've got to pick one. Simtech, Pacific, or LaRousse. You can't have all three. You pick Simtech. However, some of the modders have managed to do some scripting changes to the game. The 2003 mod has the one-shot qualifying system. You wait your turn in the garage and there's a prompt on the top of the screen that tells you who's currently on track, then it tells you to go out when it's your turn. The game also supports multiple model types unlike the previous games, so while before you had to download a generic car shape and then apply liveries to that, you can go into the game files and basically make a multi-class F1 season with 1995 cars, 2008 cars and 2016 cars. It has to be said, again, due to limitations in the engine, driving the hybrids is borderline impossible. You basically stop at 2013. That's not a problem because that mod is amazing. Not only did the failures return, the game also included full 3D pit crew that can be seen on replays, unlike the current sims on the market. When you request a pit stop, the crew runs out of the garage carrying the tyres and refuelling equipment, and then in practice, you pull up outside your garage and the crew comes out and pushes you back into the garage and then jacks you up and puts the little TV monitor down in front of your face. Full immersion. And yes, the Codemasters F1 games also do this, but unlike in F1 2020, you have full control of your car in the pit lane. You don't have this stupid on-rails entering and leaving of your pit box and getting pushed back into the garage thing that they do. And yes, iRacing has got 3D pit crew on the IndyCar and NASCAR side of things, and ACC also has a 3D pit crew. They're not seen on replays or on a broadcast, and it kills immersion for viewers. And I don't know why they do it. It's probably because more resources. A game from 20 years ago can do it. Why can't you? Overall improvements to the UI and the setup screens were improved as well. There's a basic mode for those who just want to fiddle with the wing and the gears and so on, and actually the gearbox settings screen allows you to enable 7th gear too. And then there's an advanced mode that unlocks access to anti-roll bar suspension settings, and the game does a great job of differentiating between the simple and advanced modes, so those of us who want to do an advanced setup can, and those who don't know how to set up a car can just do a basic setup. However, the game included something called the Gpedia, where an actual Formula 1 engineer talked you through what does what. So anti-roll bars do this, and the bump stops do that, and yada yada yada. With videos. It was so in-depth. Again, this is pre-YouTube. And like in the other games, every single thing that you touch on the car affects performance. Too much front wing over rear wing and you'll be doing your best Sebastian Vettel impression. Reverse it, and it's the full Luciano Berti into the wall at Blanchimont. And to go back to the failures, it became a lot more realistic in Grand Prix 4 than in the previous 2 games. The back markers will break down a lot more frequently than the front runners, but because the McLarens broke down quite a bit in the 2001 season, their chance of failure is increased. Sure, you'll finish a lot more races in a row with a McLaren than you will in a Minardi, but you still have that thing going on. Williams BMWs, while being at the top end of the field, will also break down a lot considering where they are. But to really experience these failures and how they can make or break a season, you really have to do 60, 75, 100% race distances to really get the most out of this feature. And admittedly, you do need to turn off the traction control to really get the full, oh my god, these cars are so twitchy like they must have been in real life type of feel to the game. And the car at times can feel like it's on rails. But considering force feedback steering wheels as we know them weren't exactly mainstream and the physics engine could only do so much, travelling at 200 miles an hour through the forest of Hockenheim and the engines blowing up, it felt just like real life. And the AI is way more convincing than it ever has been in any of the modern Codemasters games. They will make moves if they get a decent slipstream on you, they will show a nose into a corner but they won't dive bomb you, and they'll leave you lots of racing room when you try to pass them. And they'll also make mistakes, and the chances of a mistake are driver dependent, so Schumacher will make way fewer mistakes than Alex Young will, for example. But at the same time, Schumacher's and Montoya's aggression levels might be a bit higher than Jensen's. And at no point as a teenager during any race I accidentally biffed JB off the road in Grand Prix 4 did I ever think I'd get to smash the man himself off the road while playing Wreckfest on New Year's Eve. But all of these features translated to the modding scene so well, and I did a playthrough of the 1997 season a few years back in Barrichello Stewart, and the engine blew 3 laps on the end at Melbourne when I had driven the wheels off the thing to get to 6th on the hardest difficulty level. Then as I pulled over to the side of the road with the car practically on fire, a marshal appeared to push my car out of the way, and then I was dumped back into the garage. None of this hit escape and head back to the garage and exit that way. Certainly no flashbacks. But the modded versions of these seasons have their own physics files and will have their own physics files for each car sometimes, so if you're driving in Schumacher's 96 Ferrari, you can load a physics file for that particular car, so it will have some of the quirks that car might have had. Certainly a lot more difficult to drive than Damon's Williams would have been that year. Yeah, it's the same for LaRousse or for Jordan or for the 2008 McLaren. And with a lot of these physics files, if you try to lob a car into a corner like you'll try to do in any other game on the planet, you'll crash. But it's not just Formula 1 seasons either, because DTM was very popular as well, and there were mods for Champ Car and IndyCar, and according to the mod site grandprixgames.org, there are 179 total mods, so full season mods that you import into Carset Manager and then export to the game and then run as normal. There are 565 tracks and 625 individual cars. So Grand Prix 4 basically became R Factor, but without being R Factor. It was almost like, right, here's the base game, I'm going to bin that off immediately and just mod my own stuff into it, and it becomes even better than it already was. It's almost like how Assetto Corsa's gone, really. They had a great initial base game, and the mod community is still keeping it running even now, even though the support for it is long dead. Those same high quality models that you'll often find in GP4 mods were later used in F1 Challenge, R Factor, and now some of them are being converted, thanks to getting permission from those original authors, into R Factor 2. Models that are many, many years old. They're that good. There is one massive issue though, and if you're sat there thinking, well, if it's that good, why aren't you showing us any footage of it? And admittedly, there isn't much footage in this video, because unlike the hardcore sims of the time, so we're talking Richard Burns Rally, NASCAR 2003 and Grand Prix Legends, Grand Prix 4 doesn't support multiple controllers on or multiple axes. So if you're running the latest Simucube direct drive wheel with some Huizenvelds, or like myself running a T300 with Fanatec Club Sport pedals that don't have a combined axis setting, you're not going to be able to run GP4 on modern gear. And although modders out there have managed to mod GPL to have this extra support, Grand Prix 4 hasn't. So if you have Thrustmaster pedals or a Logitech system or any pedals that support combined axes, you can play Grand Prix 4 no problem. But I can't. That's annoying. I mean, I could just play it on the keyboard, but I'm so used to wheels now that it's quite difficult. Because you've got to run it with half of the driver aids turned on. It's still good though. Or you can watch Jimmy Broadbent do his live stream from about, 5 years ago where he played as Arrows. That was entertaining. Grand Prix 4 is a benchmark and still has so much stuff in it that games and sims today still won't or don't implement. A Toyota 2016 moment at Le Mans would be realistic, if not a tad annoying. Imagine Jurnej Simoncic losing the FSR world title because his gearbox threw a wobbly, or me getting a puncture in a touring car race because I went over the gravel. It's supposed to be sim racing, after all. Like Shenmue for open world games, Grand Prix 4 should form a basis for all modern racing games to follow. It's up there with Fallout New Vegas, Shenmue and Resident Evil 2 as my favourite games of all time. And while the 3D Grand Theft Auto games partially owe their existence to Shenmue, there are many racing games that can take what Grand Prix 4 did and improve upon. But they don't. If you're in your early to mid 30s, you may have started your sim racing career on Grand Prix 2, maybe even the first one, and you may share some of the same sentiment that I'm talking about right now. I mean, if you haven't, then, well, the game's classed as abandonware, so a Google search will get you where you want to be, and then you just get CSM and Zaz tools to be able to run all the mods. Despite not being able to run it too well on modern sim racing rigs, and that you effectively need the mods to get the most out of it, but because it's got all of those failures and all that other stuff already built into the game, okay, by modern standards it's not particularly realistic, but still, it's by far the most immersive F1 racing game ever made. I'd even go as far as to say the best. Did you play any of the Jeff Crammond games? Does it annoy you that it has so many features that modern F1 games just don't have? Leave all thoughts you may have on the matter in the comments section. So if you've enjoyed this edition of Storytime Meets Pressing Issues, then give this video a thumb up. And for more like this, click subscribe with the bell on so you get all the latest. Big thanks to all the patrons of this channel on Patreon for their continued support. And if you want to join them, or just get in on the Discord stuff or the social media nonsense, then all the links you need will be in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye. Right, so it's A, Z, comma and dot. Alright, let's go.